You mentioned something right there, which is what is the problem with not having adequate levels of nitric oxide being produced in the body? What are some of the ramifications that can happen?
Okay, there's a whole bunch of them. When we initially made the discovery that our bodies produce NO, we didn't know what the ramifications were. And then shortly thereafter, we showed that if you don't have enough NO, you'll get hypertension, you'll get high blood pressure, because the arteries make nitric oxide to keep the blood pressure down in the normal range. As soon as you start blocking production of NO, hypertension. Same thing, if you block the production of nitric oxide, you can get a stroke because you get blood clotting occurring unnaturally in the brain. If the blood clots unnaturally in the coronary arteries of the heart, you get a heart attack. So NO is required to maintain those functions. Also, if you have inadequate NO, we know now, based on another discovery we made in the early 90s, that males will develop impotence or erectile dysfunction. But let's not leave the ladies out. Ladies who make inadequate amounts of NO will also suffer from erectile dysfunction in the form of they lose their sensual or sexual arousal. They lose sexual arousal, the libido, when the nitric oxide levels come down. And the other aspect of it, of course, something that you're an expert in, it's called the brain. The brain depends so heavily on nitric oxide for numerous functions. The most important functions we know about NO in the brain is that the nitric oxide promotes learning, memory recall, recalling information in the memory, and also just you remembering facts and so on. The other point that I always make to graduate students and young investigators is that the brain has more nitric oxide in it than does the rest of the body. And we don't really know why. All we know is that NO in the brain promotes memory recall, learning, and so on. But there's got to be more functions. You know, I think NO is important in the brain to dilate all the blood vessels, to keep the blood circulating in the brain, to keep the delivery of oxygen and nutrients going to the brain. And when you dilate arteries, you also promote the removal or washout of metabolites that can injure the brain, just like they would in your muscles when you're working. And so I personally believe that the nitric oxide is one of the most important signaling molecules in the brain. And what I can tell you, Drew, is that as a Nobel laureate, I can get by saying anything I want. So I'm making that statement.
You probably know that heart disease is the #1 killer of all. Cancers closely behind it, strokes, Alzheimer's, dementia, complications from diabetes, you name it, and they're all right there. And one of the major factors in preventing that is cranking up levels of nitric oxide. Nitrogen and oxygen together make nitric oxide. I'm Dr. Jack Wolfson, board certified cardiologist of the Doctors Wolfson, and I realize for my patients it's very important to measure levels of nitric oxide and then raise those. And we can do it with 10 amazing foods that can do things naturally. So 10 foods we want to get into your diet. And we start that off in no particular order, but let's go with cacao. Raw cacao, which is the main ingredient of chocolate, is beneficial on so many different levels, but cranks up nitric oxide. Citrus, those bioflavonoids do some amazing things to help crank up nitric oxide. With nitric oxide, we build that up in several different ways, and all these different foods help for all those components of cranking up nitric oxide. Pomegranate is famous for that. Now, once again, everything we want to do is organic. Walnuts, sprouted walnuts do it. Arugula and spinach are tremendous sources of nitrates, which are converted into nitric oxide. Beets are, of course, famous for cranking up levels of nitric oxide. Nature's sexual enhancer is the beets. Watermelon is very high in something called citrulline, and L-citrulline is an amino acid that gets converted into nitric oxide along with L-arginine, and L-arginine is also found in those green leafies, but also in those walnuts that we mentioned, and in fact, all those healthy sprouted nuts are important. And then meat and seafood are very high in levels of CoQ10. CoQ10 helps all of these different enzymatic functions help crank up energy in the body as well, so that'll boost nitric oxide. And then finally, garlic, organic garlic, helps to raise levels of nitric oxide by upgrading that nitric oxide synthase enzyme that synthesizes nitric oxide. Those are your 10 foods.
Dr. Rob Cywes, and today, again, I'm going to wade into a controversial topic. Again, a lot of the topics that I speak about are not necessarily my primary wheelhouse. It's stuff that I've thought a lot about. So I'm sharing, not as an expert, but as someone opining, as someone thinking about a disease. And today we're going to talk about Alzheimer's disease. Gray matter death, progressive neuronal gray matter loss in older age. Alzheimer's disease is caused, as far as we know, by chronic inflammation of the brain itself and certainly of the blood vessels that supply the brain. And the causes are multifactorial because the causes of inflammation and vasculitis, or inflammation of the blood vessels, has a variety of different causes. We know one of the common causes is infection. And especially if those of you remember the old slow-growing viruses that occurred, mad cow disease, for example, was one of them. We had these Jakob-Creutzfeldt diseases, which were viruses that slowly caused damage in the brain. Infection and a variety of other possibly bacterial origins may cause progressive gray matter loss, death of those brain cells. Radiation can cause that. Nicotine and carbohydrates and other toxins specifically cause Alzheimer's disease. Now, it's an interesting part about carbohydrates causing Alzheimer's disease, because they cause Alzheimer's disease, as far as we're aware, on a multiple different levels.